Hello, and welcome back to Capitol Hill Ocean Talk on oceanslive.org. I'm your host, Kate Thompson, with NOAA's Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, coming to you live from the museum in Washington, D.C. for Capitol Hill Ocean Week 2014. Throughout the week, we've been bringing you behind-the-scenes conversations with some of the most influential ocean leaders here at CHOW. If you have questions for our guests, be sure to send them to us through the Oceans Live chat. Joining me now in the studio, I have Dr. Holly Bamford, Assistant Administrator for NOAA's National Ocean Service, which serves as the lead federal agency providing science-based solutions to address evolving economic, environmental, and social pressures on our oceans and coasts. My other wonderful guest here is Buck Sutter, Director for the Office of Habitat Conservation at NOAA Fisheries. Buck oversees the implementation of the NOAA Habitat Blueprint and the regional initiatives for fisheries, as well as managing programs on essential fish habitat protection, coral conservation, and restoration center initiatives. Thanks you both so much for coming here to talk to me about some coastal resiliency issues.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
So Holly, sometimes, we hear the statement there's a crisis along our coast. What does that really mean?
Right. Well, if you look at the definition of crisis, it's a time of difficulty. It's a time when difficult or important decisions need to be made. And that's exactly what we're seeing on the coast now. We see the population is increasing along our coast. We've seen since the 1970s a 40% increase in population. We also have infrastructure that's aging. At the same time, you have these insults through sea level rise, intense storms. So you have people in this difficult situation who are now going to need to make difficult decisions about how to make our communities more resilient in the face of these change.
Well, coastal resilience is a huge mouthful.
It is.
Especially for these people that live in these communities that need to better understand how to mitigate what's going on. So what does that mean, Buck?
Well, it's a very encompassing term. I think that it involves both the environment itself, the habitat and the ecosystem, but also the people that live along. So for a community to be resilient or a coastline to be resilient, you have to have healthy seagrass, healthy sand dunes. If we really want to have healthy fish, they all are all part of that. If you want, and so you have to look at that whole system together. And so when a system is healthy, when we have a storm or when sea level rise, we can be able to react to that. When oysters are healthy, it can withstand storm surge and sea level rise.
Well, Storm Sandy, I think, took us all by a large surprise in coastal areas along the East Coast, from the Chesapeake all the way up to New York.
Yeah.
So after Sandy, we saw communities like Point Lookout and Lido Beach, which invested in healthy dune systems, fared much better than other communities like Long Beach. Mm-hmm. In 2006, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers proposed beach elevation and dunes. The community of Long Beach then declined, but Point Lookout and Lido Beach experienced losses to $2 to $3 million range, which is a crazy amount of money. But property and infrastructure losses total exceeded $200 million.
Yeah.
So with examples like these, why isn't a mix of gray and green infrastructure catching on with people?
Right. Well, I mean, we have years and years of information on gray infrastructure. And what we mean by gray is the concrete, like the seawalls and the hardened structure. People understand and feel comfortable when they see a huge seawall in front of them. They know, okay, well, that can withstand a 13-foot storm surge, and if it does breach it, they could pump the water out in 2 or 3 days. When it comes to green infrastructure, the biggest problem, or natural base, what I mean by that is dunes, seagrass, oyster beds. We don't have the full understanding of the value of natural-based infrastructure as it comes to coastal storms and absorbing some of that impact. We have a very good understanding of how natural and nature-based infrastructure can clean water. So we've seen in the city of Chicago where they take rainwater, and before it drains into the Great Lakes, it actually goes through a filter system like the wetlands. What we're looking at is how do those wetlands, how do those oyster beds, how do those dunes protect in a major storm when it comes up? Now, in the example, as you mentioned, the dunes have shown to show significant protection against surge. It actually absorbs some of that energy instead of deflecting it like a seawall would. But the oyster beds and other things, we just don't know, so communities are afraid to invest in it. But I think that's the gap that we need to fill, is the research.
So after Sandy, we hear that that was the big turning point. That was just kind of like the tornadoes that slammed in the middle of the United States in the past couple of years, that people are like, oh, we really need to build differently. We need to think differently about what we do. Well, what is the turning point? What does that mean to you, Buck?
Well, so I think that you hit on a key point there, and that is we have to really change the way we think. And that's somewhat uncomfortable for people, and so we have to provide information in a way that people can relate to it. You look, for instance, even though this wasn't Hurricane Sandy, somebody who wants to go into church in a downtown Norfolk. I heard this the other day on NPR that they have to time when they have services because the roads flood because of subsidence. So the point is that you have to, if we look at systems like when a subway gets flooded with water, you have to start thinking, are we doing the right thing? So part of our job, quite frankly, is to start talking to communities, talking with people who talk to communities, so that we can folks can really understand what options they have. When you talk about green infrastructure, we invest a lot in things like oyster reefs, health of coral reefs, but also things like living shorelines as an option to having gray or a seawall because of the fact that it absorbs. And then as sea levels rise, it can grow with the sea as it comes up. But people have to understand, what does that cost them? How can they rely on it? And I think that that's the part that we have to understand, is a balance between nature and between what the needs are. Mm-hmm. And that nature provides a lot of services. I mean, that same seawall isn't a very good place for little baby fish to grow up, but if you use oyster reefs, that's a great place for it. So there's a connection between the things that we care about, like fish for recreation or commercial, but also protects our homes.
Well, with both National Ocean Service and with National Marine Fisheries Service, you are the wet side of NOAA, mm-hmm. And you work really closely with community decision makers. What are you hearing from them? What do they need in help on these situations?
They need information. Yesterday I just came from a meeting with the reinsurance industry, and they care about risk and risk assessment. And they have a good handle when they evaluate risk on intense storms like hurricanes or hail. They care about hail, but what they are not necessarily incorporating in their risk analysis is the climate information. So they're really looking to us, mm-hmm. to provide that science, the science-based decision making, but not just the science like a scientist would provide, but like a way to put it into intelligence, basically better decision making. How do you take that information, translate it through models and information, and then communicate that back to an industry that might not have that science background? So NOAA, I think, does a really mm-hmm. good job of reaching out, particularly the programs that we deal with. They're very community-based. The people we work with live in the community. Their children go to school. They build trust with the community. What we do in Blue Skies Planning is provide the information, the data, and the decision-making tools. So when the next Sandy hits, they have the information to make the best decisions, to be more resilient, to bounce back quicker. So
what is NOAA doing to make its own infrastructure resilient to coastal hazards?
That's a good question, because if you can't say with a straight face that we're taking it seriously, then all it is a bunch of talk, quite frankly. And so what we've been doing is we have a lot of labs that are along coastal areas around the United States, and looking at things like living shorelines as a way to, a lot of our facilities are aging. Is this a viable way for us to show that we actually walk the talk, we just don't talk it, and then use that as a demonstration? Because one of the challenges, quite frankly, is people want to see the cost that's involved with that in terms of real dollars, but also what are they giving up or what are they gaining? And I think one of the things that we have to be able to do is show the value that a healthy habitat, or a healthy coast, a resilient coast brings to that community and to the people that come there for vacation or actually live there.
Yeah. Within the federal government, there's all kinds of grants that go out to local communities. Mm-hmm. But NOAA is part of the Department of Commerce. A lot of people don't know that, understand that. Why doesn't NOAA work with other agencies like the U.S. Economic Development Administration to ensure that small business grants include an element of coastal resilience when appropriate?
It's interesting you bring that up. Tomorrow, I'll be meeting briefing actually the Secretary with Undersecretary Sullivan in conjunction with EDA, NIST, Census, and the other bureaus about resiliency. Secretary Pritzker has in her strategic plan a whole section on environment and how do we encompass and bring together business with the environment. I mean, she's an extremely smart businesswoman. She gets that those two things are interrelated. In order to move commerce in and out of our ports, we need strong infrastructure. We need to make sure that the goods can get in and out of those ports, get on the rails, get on the tracks to get to the Walmart in Idaho. When Sandy came in, we saw some delays in some of the UPS and the FedEx, and those companies were impacted. When you start talking jobs and economy and the connection between commerce and the environment and how resilience can make us more reliable in getting those goods on the shelf, that hits home for a lot of people. And so tomorrow we'll be working with EDA on their grants, NIST in their science and understanding of resilient buildings, building codes, and NOAA as it comes to our expertise and understanding of working with communities.
Great. Well, you mentioned climate earlier and impacts that are happening. So in the future, I think the biggest impact is going to be sea level rise, and it's impacting storms and everything that's going on. So we saw 3 major reports recently on climate change in the last 3 months, and the results probably weren't surprising to anybody here at this conference. Right. But why, it seems like we've been preaching to the choir on this stuff. Nobody's really getting it. You said, what impacts me, what impacts my family, my wallet? Right. That's when they take notice of these things. Why do we need to reach out to audience that might not be here today or online with us? Why do we need to be able to reach out to them, Buck?
Well, I think we have to look at where decisions are being made, and that's really at a local level. And I think this is where we are very strong in partnering with Holly's group and around NOAA, is that in dealing with partners and taking the information that we learn from a science perspective, whether you're talking about economics or other biological things that are important, and making it real and showing people how they can make smart decisions and what options they have and what the value of what they have in their hands. A lot of times people don't understand that a healthy ecosystem, when we look at the water that's coming into an area from a river, the seagrass that's alongside of it, the mangroves and oysters, and when those things are all working together, it provides a very strong economic base for that community. And is a very strong economic driver. There's been several publications that have come out from using some of our NOAA data that shows that this is a great investment in it, for our nation, actually, to have healthy, functional systems.
Let me play off a little bit of what Buck said. I think he's absolutely right. It takes a community approach to do this. I think you said, people might not be getting it. I think sometimes we debate the wrong things. When you're talking with folks, if we start debating climate change, whatever, if you're on opposite ends of that spectrum, you're going to argue until you're blue in the face and you're not going to get anywhere. What I've found to be successful is talk about resilience and how do we make our communities more resilient, our economies more resilient. And give you an example. When a hurricane comes in, I think about some of the storms we've had here in Washington, some of the big snowstorms, or even after Sandy. If a business cannot bounce back quickly after a storm, either because the roads are out, their power's out, their people can't get to work because their roads are flooded, that impacts their business, right? So if we start making plans to be more resilient, like evacuation routes, build stronger buildings, better building codes, now people understand that they want to be better because they want to protect their economy, they want to protect their jobs. At the same time, you're protecting the communities and the environment. So moving away from a conversation about climate and moving more towards a conversation about resilience, people seem to really resonate with that because it hits them in their pocketbooks or it hits them personally.
Right. Well, I think NOAA is doing an amazing job working with communities to ensure that we have the tools we need to mitigate against what's going on right now. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having us very much.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks, great. Buck. So thank you again, and that's it for us here at Capitol Hill Ocean Talk today, but we will be back tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. with lots more great guests and fascinating discussions from the final day of CHOW 2014. As a reminder, all of our broadcasts and our official panels from this year's CHOW will be archived at oceanslive.org, so be sure to check back and catch up with anything you missed. Once again, thank you to everyone who watched our shows today and to the museum for hosting us. We'll see you tomorrow here on oceanslive.org.